Welcome to the Family Beacon podcast from Minnesota Family Council with hosts Grace Evans and Moses Brattrud. Stay informed on the top stories on life, family, and religious freedom. Get the facts, stand for truth. Hello and welcome back to the Family Beacon podcast. My name is Grace Evans. I'm here with Moses Brattrud. Let me give you a quick rundown of everything we will be discussing on the Family Beacon today. First, we have more info from our attorney, Renee Carlson, on the discriminatory Take Pride, quote-unquote, act. Next, we will be giving you a legislative update. We'll also be discussing some recent polling that shows the truth about abortion, the fact that abortion hurts fathers too, not just women, not just children, but fathers. It hurts entire families. Finally, we will discuss a new left-wing poll that shows that Americans overwhelmingly support restrictions on gender transition procedures for minors. It's what we've been saying 4 months, and we'll keep saying it. The truth doesn't lie. All right, Moses, go ahead and take us away.
I absolutely will. I first have to say congratulations and a big shout out to my co-host Grace, who finished her last college class today.
Woo! Thank you, Moses. It feels so good. I really can't believe it still. It's very surreal. It was Greek this morning at 8 a.m. and now I'm done. It's crazy. I get to graduate next week. I only have one final left. I submitted all my other assignments. I'm practically free.
Oh my goodness. What a feeling. That is so cool. Oh man, that takes me back to many years ago when I graduated from college, and just that feeling of freedom and being able to move into, well, yes.
For me.
Yep. And so that's just so cool. I'm just so proud of you. You've, Grace, I think okay, I don't want to put you on the spot, but are you graduating with some certain types of academic honors as well?
Wow. Well, thank you. Well, I don't really want to say my GPA on the podcast, but it's very good.
Are you on the, does your school have an honor roll?
Unfortunately, they don't. Now, I wish they did.
But if they did, Grace would be on it. I think
yeah, my GPA is great.
Awesome.
So if
Well, don't
I'm
they
giving
do
I'm giving the presidential address for...
She's giving the presidential address. Okay.
At the presidential reception. Yep.
That is so Grace, the overachiever. Guys, I'm sorry if you can hear any construction noise in the background. There's a little bit of work being done in our building. So apologies for that. And without further ado, I want to get into some of these stories that you mentioned this week, Grace. And so I think one of my favorite things is working with Renee Carlson, and Grace can say the same. She is awesome, and she is one of those attorneys who is really able to encapsulate why something is good or bad in legal language, but that's really accessible to people. And she does that on a lot of issues, religious freedom issues, for example. So there's this bill called the Take Pride Act, and I will read very, very quickly the language that we're concerned about, and this is language that has been adopted. So as far as I'm aware, this is close to becoming state law. So. It changes the Minnesota Human Rights Act, and it says that things like youth sports organizations, scouting organizations, boys or girls clubs, programs providing friends and counselors or role models, youth theater, dance, music, artistic organizations, agricultural organizations for minors, and other youth organizations may not discriminate on the basis of sexual orientation. I didn't quite read that verbatim, but basically this bill seeks to abolish the existing state law, allowing nonprofits that serve minors to uphold sex distinctions in hiring practices. So we're talking about scouting, we're talking about youth sports organizations, things like that. I really have to shout out to Alpha News for covering this crucial topic and for bringing our very own Renee Carlson in to do a written interview about why this is such a bad bill. And I think it's worth taking a couple minutes on this because, first of all, it could affect an organization that you as a member of the audience are a part of. So we really need to be aware of this. And also, it just speaks to the overreach that we've seen this legislative session, legislators pushing things that are frankly unconstitutional. But don't take it from me, take it from Renee. This is what she says. She says this legislation is a significant encroachment on the fundamental liberties of Minnesotans who choose to live consistent with their personal moral values and religious beliefs. Rather than protect fundamental liberties, this bill creates a slippery slope to continue repealing the law's existing protections for people of conscience or people of faith, especially individuals who believe in sex-based biological distinctions between males and females. So an example would be if you have a boys club, and there are clubs like that, at least I know of in the Twin Cities, probably throughout the state, where maybe you have a club that seeks to give father figure type mentors to young boys, young men, maybe who don't have a father at home. Renee says that the clear reading of this new law, a boys club would be prohibited from hiring male-only mentors. So you'd have to, the club would have to hire, for example, perhaps women who identify as male to be fatherhood mentors for kids. And that's just like, it's shocking to really think about. It's just, I think we all can see, I think, where that could go wrong. It's not just a bad idea, it's actually unconstitutional. So Renee continues, many children benefit from various opportunities provided through the types of non-public service organizations this bill seeks to abolish, where mentorship based on sex distinctions is critical. And finally, she concludes, this legislation is senseless, deprives Minnesota children of opportunities to interact with mentors and role models that they can relate to at critical times in their development. And finally, it forces nonprofits to compromise their mission and abandon their values. So this is just a extremely bad idea. And as I said, it's unconstitutional. So we hope that if this bill is passed into law, that it would be challenged very quickly in court, that there would be a resolution. And I hope that it wouldn't be a long, protracted court battle, but I hope that it would be more of a quicker, nope, that was a bad thing. And that does happen. The legislature will pass something and the court will say nope and prevent something from going into force or keep it from being in effect for very long. And the article concluded by saying that the House DFL caucus did not respond to a request for comment, which is, I think, sad that they're not even out there defending what this bill does. So this is actually the other thing I wanted to give an update on, Grace, is this thing that we talked about a few weeks ago, where there was concern that this bill, and I believe it's the same bill, HF 447, that it would have created a loophole for pedophilia to be recognized as a protected sexual orientation under the Minnesota Human Rights Act. And Representative Harry Niska offered this amendment on the House floor that said the physical or sexual attachment to children by an adult is not a protected class under this chapter. So just making that very clear. And you know what? That amendment was adopted unanimously in the House version of the bill. But then, so this is, my understanding is that this went into the Public Safety and Judiciary Finance Omnibus bill, which then has to be wrangled between the different versions passed in the Senate and the different versions passed in the House. We talked about the conference committee process. So that bill went into conference committee. And Senator Mark Johnson, the minority leader in the Minnesota Senate, he released a statement yesterday calling out Democrats for not including this unanimously adopted protection for kids in the version of the bill. So he says, moreover, the bill undoes the unanimous change in the House to leave in law the language that clearly states pedophilia is not a protected class. We didn't think this bill could get any worse, but somehow they found a way. And that's really pointed language coming from that particular legislator, who is generally someone who's very seen as a peacemaker, who's moderate with his words. So that's really sad. And we're getting down. We talked about this a few weeks ago. We said, how wonderful is it that people in the Minnesota House unanimously voted for this new protection for kids that would keep kids safe, and so it's really sad. It's honestly, it's beyond sad. It's angering that we're back to square one on this. And This bill now needs to be passed by the House and Senate, but it's possible, and we hope that the bill will be amended again to change that language so that that's not a concern. That's really our hope, and we just would ask that you would pray that there would be no safe harbor in Minnesota law for pedophiles, for people who would do children harm. So that's our sad legislative update for this week, and we will continue to keep you guys posted. Make sure you get our email alerts, because that's where we provide breaking information and opportunities for you to take action.
Absolutely. You can also follow us on all social media platforms at MN Family Council. We're on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Moses, thank you so much for those updates. Those are crucial, just truly crucial for our base to understand. So I really appreciate you breaking those two things down. Now I'd like to turn to our next story of the day, which is based on a poll that the Washington Stand recently wrote about, but this poll was conducted, it was a new study, I should say. It was a study that was commissioned by Support After Abortion, and this study was then conducted by Shapard Research of Oklahoma City. Now, I will link this article down below so you guys can look at it. You can pull it up in front of you if you want to reference it. But I want to talk about this new study that shows the truth about abortion, the truth that abortion hurts fathers too. Like I said in the intro, it's a common misconception that, well, number one, the misconception is abortion doesn't hurt anyone. And then sometimes people will concede, okay, well, it hurts women. But what's really not talked about a lot is the fact that it hurts fathers. I mean, it always hurts a child, of course. It hurts women, but it also hurts those fathers who are involved.
Absolutely.
It tears apart the family. And so I think that this study is super eye-opening and helpful in just speaking the truth about what abortion does to families and really countering the narrative that abortion is just like going to a dentist office. Like, it's just like getting a tooth pulled. It's just like getting your teeth cleaned. It's just like getting an x-ray done. No, abortion is murder, and therefore it affects every single member of the family. So let's jump in. This study shows that as many as 1 out of every 7 American men have experienced worsened mental health due to losing a child through abortion, including a majority of men who describe their views on abortion as, quote, pro-choice. So of all the men polled in this study, 83% of men said that they either sought help or they could have benefited from talking to someone about their emotions after undergoing their partner, wife undergoing an abortion.
They're such wimps. It's just a clump of cells. He said.
I was nodding as you're talking, and then I had to stop nodding.
His voice dripping with irony. I mean, yeah, like, just in case you're listening, I am being so ironic there. Of course, like, this is a child, and of course that decision would it's more than a decision. Of course that horrifying thing that took place would affect you. I mean, it just seems like why would you not think that would affect you?
Yeah, exactly. So this survey also found that 71% of all men whose partner, wife, girlfriend, etc. had an abortion suffered adverse mental health impact afterwards, including those who consented to or even pushed for abortion themselves, which is truly heartbreaking. And these statistics include the fact that 78% of the men who identify as pro-choice on abortion. So it's not just like, oh, they just pulled pro-life men, and that's really what's going on here. No. 78% of men who identify as pro-choice. That includes that number. So this is a quote from the report. It says, if nearly 3/4 of men regret abortion and 20% of men reportedly experience abortion in their lifetime, then 1 in 7 men may be coping with negative impacts. So that's where they get that number. That's really what I wanted to say. So Greg Mayo, who is the chairman of Support After Abortion, the National Men's Task Force, told the Washington Stand something that's truly heartbreaking, but highlights the pain that men undergo after suffering their child being stripped away from them. So he lost 2 children due to abortion in late 1900s. He said, quote, I had no say in either decision. There simply wasn't an area of my life that was untouched by my loss. Work, education, relationships, including eventually my marriage and the children I raised. He talks about his therapist. He says that his therapist just dismissed the trauma that he suffered over this lost fatherhood. He says that the therapist told him, quote, that it probably wasn't a thing, that my feelings and behavior weren't a result of these abortions, which that's just crushing.
Yeah.
That, I mean, what it's the facts. Like, what is an abortion? An abortion ends an innocent life. Like, why is abortion necessary? It's because there is a living, breathing human being inside a woman. And so to say that wasn't a thing, it's heartbreaking. And
something was there,
yes.
a growing human life, and then it was not there anymore through unnatural means. Of course that would affect a woman. Of course that would affect a man. I mean, I just think that's such a horrible thing for a therapist to say to someone who's hurting.
Yeah. So he was driven to grief, and he says that he engaged in life-threatening activities motivated by risking his life. So that's heartbreaking. Now, of course, he has founded, or he's the chair, of Support After Abortion, the National Men's Task Force part of it. And so he has dedicated his life to helping fathers truly grieve, because these fathers need to grieve, and they need to grieve well, and they need to grieve in community, and to be given the truth about the hope that there is after this. And so something that this article from the Washington Stand pointed out was pretty fascinating to me. I didn't know the specifics of the history of the pro-life movement and the pro-abortion movement. But this article says that in the decades after Roe v. Wade, there were liberal Supreme Court justices that froze out fathers from having any voice in whether their children lived or died. So Planned Parenthood of Central Missouri versus Danforth in 1976, that opinion actually rendered laws requiring a husband to consent to an abortion unconstitutional, which that's heartbreaking. Wasn't aware when that happened, and wasn't aware of the specific case. So then 16 years later, with Planned Parenthood of Southeast Pennsylvania, probably, versus Casey, that's in 1992, they ruled that spousal notification imposed an undue burden on the, quote, constitutional right of abortion on demand. That's heartbreaking as well. So those are two examples in different states of in different states, these cases being taken to the Supreme Court, and then rulings being made, and really just pushing fathers out onto the sidelines and saying, basically what these laws say is that, men, you don't have a voice. This child isn't yours. It's just a woman's child. And really, I think that that's, for all this talk that we hear from the pro-abortion movement about how it's a woman's choice, what it does is, one, it alienates fathers that love their children from their children, but then also it encourages cowardly men to refuse to take any sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Responsibility. That's what I'm looking for. They refuse to take any kind of responsibility. And what's hard about that is they're encouraged in that. And there's a reason, you guys, that fathers are supposed to pay child support. There's a reason for that. But when the baby isn't born, the baby isn't seen as human. And so that's just truly heartbreaking to me. Moses, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, since you are a father. Yeah,
I mean, like, just the idea that, I get where it comes from. It comes from the assumption, the wrong assumption that a child in the womb is not human, is just a part of the woman's body. So only she has control over what happens to it. Obviously, that's absurd. Like, a child has two parents. There would be no pregnancy if there was not a man involved. And of course, after the child is born, the courts, our entire legal system, and society recognizes that a child has two parents. So a mom, if the parents are not, are no longer married or never were, a mom just can't waltz out of the state with her child unless a court has given her sole custody and the father has no visitation rights, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the idea that something would be permissible in the womb, that is to say, for a woman to make a unilateral decision about her child, but not possible outside of the womb, it gets back to that false assumption that this is not a human life. But of course it is. And if you don't think that it is, wait a couple months and see what happens. Bam. You will then be so confronted with the fact that is a human life. So I just think, like men in that situation, like I think there's some situations where, as we've talked about in the past, where men are pressuring women to get abortions. No, of course, even in that case, the men could feel extremely guilty and horrified by what they've done afterward. But I think in a lot of other situations, maybe the man wants to keep the child, and the woman does not want to. And so there could be, I can just see so much how that could be traumatic for the father. And just speaking as a father, I just love my kids like more than life. And so to imagine anything coming between me and them is just, I'm going to stop talking about it because it just makes me angry.
Thank you, Moses, for your insight there. I'm going to wrap up with this story quick, I would encourage you to read this article just because there's a lot of personal stories included here. I don't have time to highlight them all, but one father who lost his child due to abortion says that he has insurmountable guilt, regret, feeling like a horrible person. Another says, I have an emptiness that always lingers. I had no choice. I couldn't save my baby. So truly heartbreaking. I don't want to end on that note with that story. There is hope. Support After Abortion offers post-abortive counseling through its After Abortion line, and men can go to that line. So it's 1-844-289-HOPE. And so I really encourage you guys to check that out. And check that out if you need to talk to someone, if you've undergone something like this, or to just honestly keep this number written down in your phone notes so that you can bring that up if you're talking to someone who needs that immediate access, immediate counseling. Because there is hope, there is healing, and like one father says, it's priceless.
Amen.
So moving on to our next poll, which just shows, it's going to highlight what we've been telling you guys all along. This comes from a left-wing poll, and it shows that Americans overwhelmingly support restrictions on gender transition procedures for minors.
Shocker,
right? So let me break that down for you guys. So 68% of U.S. adults oppose children ages 10 to 14 having access to puberty blockers. 58% oppose to children ages 15 to 17, which includes hormonal treatments, puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, etc. So that is pretty surprising if you aren't super in the loop about things. If you're just looking at, say, like the legislation that
in Minnesota
is right. If you're looking at that, then you might think, oh, really? But I mean, even in Minnesota, I forget the exact statistic, but the Center for the American Experiment.
No, it was even more. It was 66%.
66%?
2/3 of all adults oppose. And I don't remember the age breakdown, Grace.
That's the thing. I couldn't remember.
I don't think there may not have been an age breakdown, but it was 2/3 of Minnesotans oppose gender reassignment for minors.
I think it's of all registered voters in Minnesota. I think it's
a lot of polls focus just on registered voters because this type of public opinion thing. If you don't vote, they don't really care about your opinion, which is a great argument to go out there and vote.
But anyways, that's just the truth, you guys. I just want you guys to be armed with the truth because sometimes it's easy to feel like we're in the minority when people look at us like we're crazy, when we just are simply advocating for, hey guys, it's wrong to mutilate children. Like that's what we're advocating for. And it's easy to think we're in the minority, but we're really not. We're actually in the majority. And even if we were in the minority, we'd still be right. But it's just good to know that there's a lot of people on our side. So just according to that same poll, actually, 2/3 of adults did not want biological males to compete in sports with other women and girls at any level, especially in youth, high school, college, or professional. Actually, in all of those, they over 62% in all of those disagreed with women having to compete on an unfair playing field with men. And that is despite a biased question that framed males as, quote, trans women and girls. So again, this is a left-wing poll that used that wording. And
Can
yet
I tell
still,
you how the Washington Post, this is their headline for this.
Okay, go.
Most Americans support anti-trans policies favored by GOP, poll shows. I mean, they're just wringing their hands and clutching their pearls over the fact that, as you're saying, people around this country, including in Minnesota, support a common sense view of sex and gender. That is to say, the idea that kids and adults, frankly, but especially we're talking about kids here, kids absolutely cannot and should not be encouraged to change their sex, change their gender.
Right, exactly. This same poll also showed that 3/4, 77% of total adults said that it was inappropriate for teachers to discuss trans identity in public schools with young children. That's kindergarten through 3rd grade. And that number does decrease through grade level, but they're still majority opposed in 4th to 5th grade, 6th to 8th grade even. Now 9th to 12th grade gets a little squishy, but overall this polling, again by a very left-wing organization, shows us the truth that we've been stating all along. Moses, I'd like you to close us out on this portion of the podcast.
So I thought, as you were talking about this article, I thought it was really interesting because I've been thinking about something President Biden said in March on this issue, and it really shows how far politicians who are perceived as moderate, like President Biden and like Governor Walz here in Minnesota, sometimes it seems crazy to us that people like that would be perceived as moderates, but they are. Okay, so that's really the perception. So President Biden was speaking about Florida's regulation of, quote, transgender medical care for children, and he called it close to sinful. What's going on in Florida is, as my mother would say, close to sinful. I mean, it's just terrible what they're doing. And he continued, it's not like, a kid wakes up one morning and says, I decided I want to become a man or I want to become a woman. The president said, I mean, what are they thinking about here? They're human beings. They love and have feelings. It's cruel. We should make sure we pass federal legislation like we passed on same-sex marriage. You mess with that, you're breaking the law and you're going to be held accountable. Now, it's sometimes unclear what President Biden is talking about, but it seems like he's saying that there should be a federal law that would ensure that gender surgeries for minors are available in all 50 states. So taking that away from the state legislature and putting that in Washington, and also that there would be some sort of legal penalties for getting in the way of that. Again, not clear. I don't want to speculate too much. And I thought this was interesting. And I want to talk about this is not, President Biden is out of step with his own church, the Roman Catholic Church, because just around that same time, within a few days of when President Biden said that, Pope Francis said this in an interview, which I thought was really interesting. He said that gender ideology was one of the most dangerous ideological colonizations. Why is it dangerous? He said, because it blurs differences and the value of men and women. All humanity is the tension of differences. It is to grow through the tension of differences. The question of gender is diluting the differences and making the world the same, all dull, all alike, and that is contrary to the human vocation. I thought that was actually kind of an interesting take. When it's not precisely what I would say, but I appreciate that the Pope is standing out on that issue, and I hope that President Biden and other Roman Catholics who have sort of been colonized by gender ideology, as Pope Francis would say, will listen to the pontiff on that issue. So, Grace, thank you so much for talking about that poll, which I find really encouraging. What are you reading this week?
Yeah, so I remember last week on the podcast, I asked you if you read Jane Eyre, and I love that book, so I'm actually rereading it because in talking to you about it, I just realized I really need more Jane Eyre in my life. So good. Reading that, and then I'm reading No Mere Mortals by Toby Sumpter, and that's actually a book on
my old
marriage.
pastor.
Yeah. Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
Yes, I've read it before, but I'm reading it again. So
cool.
Yeah, what about you?
I'm almost done with a book called Revelations of Divine Love by Lady Julian of Norwich, or Saint Julian, I suppose. And she was from the 14th century, and she was kind of like a mystic Christian writer, or she was an anchoress, which I guess is a type of nun, or kind of like a nun. I don't know too much about her, to be totally honest with you guys. And there's some things that in the book that I'm like, whoa. It's a little bit crazy, but at the same time, she's talking about the love within the Trinity, the love the Father has for the Son and for the Spirit, and how that's reciprocated, and the fact that God created the world for love because He loved us, and that is, of course, also why He saved the world after we fell. So there's a ton of good stuff in the book, even if there are some things that are really real head scratchers, and I can really see why this is just a classic of. And I don't think you and any of our listeners will fully understand how strange it is for me to be reading this. I have never read any type of mystical Christianity, any type of prophetic stuff. That is something I generally try to avoid. But I have found this book to be really helpful, and I can definitely recommend it as something that, just take it on board and think about it. Think about whether it's biblical to talk this way. I've wanted to read this book for years because there's this famous line in it that T.S. Eliot uses, and I'm going to get it so that I can. I'm going to pull it up so that I can quote it accurately. It's in the third section of Little Gidding, which is one of the 4 quartets by T.S. Eliot, of course, one of the great poets of the 20th century and a great Christian poet. all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well.
Wow.
So like that's a quote from Lady Julian. So her confidence in God, that though things are so bad in our human life, we suffer so much, we see suffering around us, we can trust in the mighty love of God, that he loves our world and us so much that all manner of all things shall be made well. I just love that. So I'm reading that. I love it. And we'll see what comes next. We can talk more about that. Grace, this is becoming my favorite part of the podcast. Can you close out this episode with some scripture?
Absolutely. And Moses, it ties in well to what you were just saying. So I want to read from Ecclesiastes 8, verses 12 and 13 today. It says, although a wicked person who commits 100 crimes may live a long time, I know that it will go better with those who fear God, who are reverent before him. Yet because the wicked do not fear God, it will not go well with them, and their days will not lengthen like a shadow. And that's really encouraging to me. Just remembering that there is nothing new under the sun. Sometimes it's easy for us to feel like our problems are really unique. And while we are facing certain challenges that we specifically have not seen in the world, like this gender mutilation of children, like, okay, that is a new phenomenon. What is the root problem? Honestly, all the root problems that we're seeing in our current age is just a forsaking of God and forsaking of how God has ordered the world. And that in and of itself is not a new phenomenon. That is something we've seen under the sun again and again. That in every age, we've seen a forsaking of God and a forsaking of how he's ordered his creation, especially humans. And so just resting in the truth that, maybe some of these wicked rulers will live a long time. We have confidence that it will go better with us, those of us that fear God, that are reverent before him. And we know that ultimately, when we're faithful, God is going to reward us. And we know how the story ends. Again, I feel like I said that every single podcast episode, but it's so true.
Yeah.
And so that's just encouraging to me. I love the whole book of Ecclesiastes, so definitely recommend. With that, we will close out today's podcast episode. Moses, do you have one more thought you wanted to share?
Well, that did actually make me think of another Bible
ahead.
verse. Really briefly, it just makes me think of, and I had to Google the reference just so you know, Psalm 130, verses 3 and 4. If you, O Lord, should mark iniquities, O Lord, who could stand? But with you there is forgiveness, that you may be feared. So there's wickedness in the world, but there's also the forgiveness of God. And that I just love that verse that you shared, and it should make us think about the deepness of sin, and the even deeper deepness of God's love and mercy to us.
Thank you, Moses. All right, you guys, this has been the Family Beacon podcast from Moses Brattrud and Grace Evans. Make sure you tune in next Friday because we release a podcast episode every single week. We're here to give you the facts so that you can stand for truth. See you next week. Thanks for listening to or watching this episode of the Family Beacon podcast from Minnesota Family Council. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts so you're up to date on life, family, and religious freedom. You can follow us on Instagram at MN Family Council and subscribe to us on YouTube to watch our content. Get the facts, stand for truth.